So thank you all for giving me your time and your listening. Uh, I was telling some of my friends here that back in New Delhi, if there was a conference starting at 9:30, we would have 5 people in the hall. But I see, like, it's amazing. So before I start, I would like to acknowledge all our collaborators whose work forms part of this presentation. I won't get a chance to thank all of them. Landscape architects, structural engineers, MEP, sustainability consultants, all of our vendors and contractors and artisans. And of course, the Studio Lotus team members over the years, past and present, and collaborators. And most importantly, our clients, without whom none of this work would exist. So I'm here representing Studio Lotus. We are currently a team of 110 people working out of one studio in New Delhi. Even as we enter the 22nd year of our practice, we still start each day slightly unsure, slightly unsteady, but always excited as we navigate our way through projects of different scales, of different typologies, from hotels, museums, institutions to small homes, restaurants, shops, and bars. But what I'd like to lean in today is the why and the how of what we do. As most of us here would know, our practices reshape themselves over the years in response to changing conditions such as clients, typologies, budgets, and briefs. But what is it that does not change? What is it that makes each of our practices an expression of who we are? We have come to discover that what has shaped us over the years and continues to do so is the underlying set of values that we try and align to, principles and beliefs that guide both our behavior on how we work in the studio and the decisions we make on projects. One of our primary concerns as a studio is to address environmental concerns in this time of climate change. But what is equally important for us is to address the sustainability of the vastly diverse social and cultural fabric of the country that I come from. I'll give you a glimpse, a small glimpse of what this looks like. So we occupy only 2.4% of the world's landmass, and yet have more than half of the globe's climatic zones, which generates 21 agroecological regions within the country, which in turn creates amongst the most diverse regional cuisines in the world, based entirely on local produce and also changes with every season. We have over 2,000 documented craft forms still alive, even though a lot of them are rapidly dying. And we have over 400 living official languages with thousands of dialects still spoken. In short, we are many countries in one. But why is all this important? Our traditional lifestyles, most of which are still vibrant and alive, are based on strong regional response, where people live in harmony with their context, richly diverse cultures which are highly local, which impact language, food, clothing, and of course, the architecture of the place. A few examples, such as in Kerala, on the southern coast of India, with its hot and humid climate, where people's clothing is as porous and ventilated as the buildings they live in. The food they eat promotes cooling in the body, and a big part of the population lives without any air conditioning. Or here in the Himalayan desert region of Ladakh, with its cold and dry climate, where the high thermal mass of mud walls with small windows and yak wool and fur on the people keeps them warm with very little artificial heating, while the salt butter tea that they drink keeps their skin supple and hydrated. Or then here in the west, the hot and dry deserts of Rajasthan and Kutch, where straw bale roofs and adobe walls of the buildings and the layers of white hand-spun cotton on people keeps the cools in and the heat out, as the spicy food keeps the sweat glands active. However, over the past few decades, India is rapidly on the road to development, becoming globalized, causing a homogenization of our aspirations as the global South seeks to play catch-up with the global North. It's caused a homogenization in our buildings, our food, our clothing, right down to the standards of comfort that we aspire for, readily discarding indigenous wisdom that we had imbibed over centuries. What then can we do differently? Can we begin to find ways to interpret the wisdom that surrounds us in a way that speaks to our future together? So I'd like to share some of the questions that have shaped what we do over the years, and it's a set of values that have emerged over time that we've practiced. We have always been a country of frugal means of doing more with less. How do we build in a way that keeps the handmade relevant at increasingly larger scales, because we have a very large population involved in construction? How do we keep our solutions forward-looking yet simple and passive for ease of access to a much larger population, looking beyond just preserving historical structures, increasingly adapting ordinary structures for the embodied carbon footprint? What does it take to do buildings that endure, just not in material, but also in people's imaginations and emotions for the inherent meaning that they bring? A lot of our clients are high net worth individuals and luxury brands. So can we reframe what luxury means using local materials and processes? For instance, elevate these with a very high degree of craftsmanship. And last, but not the least, what we all do, weave all of this together as a work of poetry that inspires us and those around us. I'll take you through a few examples showing how we have attempted to address some of these questions over the years. One of our earliest projects 20 years ago was a very small shop for a leading Indian fashion designer at a luxury mall in New Delhi. This mall was the first home to then new to India foreign luxury brands. These stores adjoining ours had budgets for interior fit-outs that were 10 times as much as we had, and not only that, we had only 60 days to design and build the store. We took inspiration from the designer's approach of using handcrafted techniques to create texture on his clothes, and we dismantled a sewing machine and then used a small team of ordinary welders on the street, much like Rajesh uses his tailors, to create texture and pattern. They hand-welded 12,000 locally sourced scissors into 12 different patterns onto metal pipe frames that were made off-site, which were then assembled on-site and inserted into a simple whitewashed bare shell. All the services, air conditioning, electricals, ran outside of this lattice cube. The clothes were framed by this lace-like filigree. As you can see in the image on the right, the imperfections of the hand welding only added to the tactility of the space. Not only was the project delivered on time and budget, but also became a celebration of the client's brand philosophy using a frugal, handmade approach. We scaled this understanding to a very different level when we had the opportunity of working for a client building a boutique hotel. In fact, this was our first architectural project. The site was in the walled city of Jodhpur in Rajasthan on a 6,000 square meter plot with 3 derelict, unlisted 17th century buildings on it, as you can see on the image in the left. The challenge was that the access to the site was through these narrow lanes which were inaccessible by construction trucks. The lanes brought us to this old gate, and that was the view that opened up, which was spectacular. The 3 buildings from the 18th and 19th centuries had been modified over time by multiple families who lived there, which left them with very little semblance of the original history and architecture. The program, the business plan, demanded 40 guest rooms. And our site plans looked at restoring the 3 old buildings as the anchors for the site, which housed the public spaces, the restaurant, the pool, and the spa. With the rooms were built around in 3 new structures. Thus, room block 1 that you see there becomes the second gateway that also blocks the view but frames the reveal of the spectacular kind of exposed view after you enter. And the rear 2 blocks become the canvas for the 3 historic buildings, all visually connected to the fort. To begin with, we identified what could be removed from the old structures, peeling away layers of paint, removing arbitrary interventions that had been made over time by the families living there, restoring traditional details in stone and lime until the jewel-like form of these historic buildings emerged from within and started reconnecting their shared history in conversation with the fort that you see at the back. The second, more challenging part was designing the new blocks using traditional materials in a contemporary idiom. These buildings had to be west-facing because of the views to the fort. We designed them as double-skin structures, like the traditional structures of the region, to cut heat and minimize the air-conditioned spaces that were only the rooms. The fort-facing balconies had to have openable stone shutters to get the view. To limit the weight, they could only be made of 20 millimeter thick stone. We wanted to hand-cut the stone for this facade using the traditional patterns of the site, but it wasn't possible to do that using this thinner stone without the stone cracking. The only way to achieve this would have been to use a CNC waterjet cut machine. But we went back and we discussed it with the client, and we wanted to stay true to the process, which was handcrafting, and we changed the design to become a much more simple graded perforation that could be hand-cut on these thin slabs that were procured from the local quarries 10 kilometers away from site. The shutters that you see in the video are fabricated by local welders and stonemasons. They weigh 420 kilos and work smoothly even today after 15 years. These not only become part of the balconies, but also the naturally ventilated circulation spaces, negotiating privacy and transparency, infusing the new blocks with the changing quality of light and shadow cast by the sharp desert sun through the different times of the day. The playful facade changes through the day as guests can modulate the shutters for privacy, and at night, the stone filigree feels like fabric as the 3 new buildings become lanterns that frame the old buildings. To breathe life into the smooth quarry-cut sandstone slabs, we turned to the craftsmen at site and over multiple prototypes generated hand-chiseled patterns in situ, which translated onto the stone surface you see on the left, which are 50 mil thick, 3 meter high solid stone slabs that are clamped only on the floor and the ceiling and divide the bathroom from the room, as you can see on the image in the right. They translate onto the solid stone perforated headboards for the beds, which also become a nightlight. The project then works on creating a conscious dialogue between the old and the new, as it seeks to create a seamless experience of history and the present. We realized that if we are to create something truly authentic that adds deeper meaning to all stakeholders, then we need to go beyond the visual form and stay true to the process and values that we set out to achieve. I think a happy coincidence that we found only later was that aside from the value this process added to the craft and the stonemason's employment, and of course the organic feeling that only the handmade can give, this process created embodied carbon only 20% that had we gone ahead with a waterjet machine for the same result. Another key learning for us was that in order to tap into the potential of this process, we needed to move beyond the comfort of our drawing boards. We had to trust the wisdom of the artisans and other stakeholders at site and partner with them to co-author the final outcome. I'll take you now to a totally different context. For the same client to build a 40-room resort near Dharamshala, this is the home of the Dalai Lama up in the northern part of India. It's a project that's still under construction. It's still not finished, so I'm just sharing unfinished images. This got spectacular views of the Himalayas to the north and the tea-growing valley to the south. And the architecture here takes a totally different form while celebrating the same values of reinterpreting the vernacular. So we moved away from the idea of multiple cottages in a resort, which fragments the guest experience and also increases infrastructure and creates servicing and circulation challenges in a hilly terrain. So we instead extruded the section of one cottage across the contours of the hill to create a single 220-meter long building with 40 suites. So the red vertical spines that you see here are individual staircases that lead to the suites, which are in yellow above and below. The blue band, which is at the ground plane, that houses all the public amenities, reception, restaurant, kitchens, and spa. This way, the rooms have no corridor on either side and have private balconies on both sides to enjoy uninterrupted views of the mountains on the north and the valley on the south. And while you're in the room, you're totally private with no need for blinds or curtains. The building in the form is inspired by the powerful yet silent rhythm of a Buddhist monastery. And the materiality is derived from the local village homes and temples of the region. We used waste slate from local quarries that villagers normally use to build their boundary walls. We were able to elevate this humble material into a luxurious expression with the same group of masons who had worked with us in Rajasthan, who came in and honed their skills with the local Himachali masons to build the sweeping form of this 220-meter long building with its thick masonry walls that give the building a high thermal mass to support the solar-powered radiant heating system that runs through the building, which gives it its timeless expression that captures the rhythm and materiality that we sought to express. The lower floors emerge from the form as it peels away from the sloping hill, and the building quietly sits at the base of the mountains, here again engaging deeply with the site and regional material and skill. We spoke to our aspiration of creating a timeless form that situates itself between the contemporary and the historic. Here's a short film that gives you a sense of the scale of the building as it takes shape. It's still unfinished, so. This is the third project for the same client, again in a different region, between Jodhpur and Jaipur, once again in Rajasthan. But what's really interesting, this is on an 800-acre rewilded forest. It's a bioreserve on a private estate with a 200-year-old rainwater storage dam, on which the original owners used to run a small tented property, but this was only run in winter. Business became unviable, and our clients entered into a joint venture to convert it into a property that could run all year round. So we opted for a simple curvilinear plan on the dam to take the room count up to 16 rooms with the public amenities at the right corner of the dam, which could also then be serviced independently. The section shows how we sunk the circulation on the west side of the dam. This gives guests uninterrupted private balconies towards both the lake-facing sunrise and the forest-facing sunsets. Due to the fragile nature of the 200-year-old dam, we needed to create a building system that was as light as the original tents and used almost no concrete. With only 8 months to build out the whole project, we designed a very light foundation system of precast hewn pipes and filled it with stone and lime. Mounted of these was a light steel framework which allowed us to run all the engineering services under the raised floor without digging any soil on the dam, and create a single sweeping roof as a double-layered waterproof heat-reflecting canvas with deep shaded overhangs to protect it from the sun. That's the sunken path to approach the rooms. You move up, and as you enter the tent, the lake gets revealed. And this takes forward the idea of unfolding thresholds from the previous RAS projects that you saw. For the tent-inspired textile interior, we worked with a young Indian designer who spends weeks on site sketching out the flora and fauna of the region and innovated on the traditional block printing craft of the region. But she created these really large, 6 to 8 feet tall blocks, which are used to hand print the linen for the tents, and further hand embroidered on these the migratory birds and animals that come to the site. Each tent has different compositions. We took the same narrative into the furniture, hand carving the casings for the air conditioning units, custom designing the camp-style furniture that was made from native acacia wood, all of which come together as happy surprises of varying compositions. This is a view of the tent looking towards the forest where you enter from, a skylight that lets in the winter sun and frames the brilliant night sky over the bed, doors that open to your private veranda on the lake, through which you step out onto a private garden. And as you move onto the lake in a boat, you see the building lightly perched on the dam. Towards the far right corner, you can see the reception, bar, and restaurant, which is inspired and formed by the traditional pavilions of the region. This building is lightly perched off the dam with a wraparound veranda which overlooks the pool on the sunken side of the dam, which is west-facing, as it cascades down into a traditional stepwell, which is also the place people enter from. The construction system uses no concrete and is a composite of crafted local sandstone clamped onto a lightweight steel structure, and where people touch the stone, it has a hand-chiseled texture that you can see on the image on the right. The air conditioning grills are hand-cut at site. This is how the building sits on the dam. The veranda with its sunrise view, you can see the stone slabs and the metal structure. The courtyard between the pavilion and the tents. The interior borrows on the same narrative of the textiles, but these are interpreted as chiseled patterns on the stone, as you can see on the image on the right. Also translated onto this bar unit with hand-carved flamingos that visit the lake in winter. The sundowner veranda overlooking the forest, and the kitchen block made of reclaimed stone that we got from the site as we dug up the foundations of the old tents. That's the stepwell built around an old existing temple which blesses guests as they arrive and depart. Together with the owners, we found a way to keep the women from the neighboring villages actively engaged in upkeeping the property through decorative and functional inserts which are done in mud and lime, such that these hand-painted rangoli patterns in the courtyards or even the numbering of the rooms have to be redone every few weeks in different ways. This is a film that captures the experience of being at site. I would like to move back up to the mountains, to the Himalayan state of Uttarakhand, where we are working currently. This is again a project that's under development for a client who loves the hills and is developing an eco-conscious community on a 100-acre plot. The biggest problem in these hills is the impact the rampant unplanned construction and torrential rain have had, causing severe erosion and landslides. And in spite of the heavy rain, ironically, there's a scarcity of water for human consumption. Together with our landscape architect, we developed an ecology-first master plan mapping the natural water runoffs and green belts, around which we developed our road network and the location for the built structures, which got translated on the site in the manner in which we built the roads, with minimal cut and fill, using small dry stone gabion retaining walls, and slope stabilization has been done using bioengineering techniques of hydroseeding and bamboo crib walls. For water retention and management, we built 300 dry stone micro-check dams, which have been created across the slopes on site, which over a period of 3 years alone have not only retained water for the site, but also regenerated an entire ecosystem of underground aquifers, and has even begun to recharge the wells of the villages downstream, which were dry for years, creating a remarkable transformation for the small region. The houses themselves are collection points for rainwater. We look at water as a community resource that's collected from the rooftop of one house and gets used by the house downstream through a gravity-fed network. The wastewater too gets recycled and used in a similar fashion. Together with structural engineers, B.L. Manjunath, we've managed to build in areas which are non-productive, on slopes virtually impossible to build in traditional methods, through a technique with almost no cut and fill and minimum alteration of the slope. To ensure the surrounding trees and slopes do not get damaged, we developed a construction method where we did not need cranes or any heavy machinery. So we created this basket-like weave of only 100 millimeter square steel pipes, such that each module is less than 100 kilos, so that 3 or 4 people can build by hand. The superstructure stilts the house off the ground, allowing the rainwater to flow through. Thereafter, a multi-layered dry construction system with minimal concrete creates a highly insulated shell that achieves global passive house standards. The structure got erected really rapidly. We could retain all the trees around, timber and slate at the facade rain screens. You can see the weave of the thin metal structure expressed on the outside and inside as the walls slice through. Hand-carved details welcome you into the house as the outside and the inside connect strongly, both in the way the house connects with the courtyards and the way the balconies perch out into the trees. This is the house encapsulated within the trees as it disappears into the forest as we had originally intended. I want to talk a little bit about a project where we ended up reinterpreting craft in yet another way in a historic site. This is the City Palace of Jaipur, where we were invited to refurbish a small cafeteria within the precinct of the Royal City Palace Museum. We proposed re-articulating the central courtyard by replacing a vestigial service block with a new connecting pavilion that also opened up a new entrance from the city, so that the cafe became another urban connector to the palace even after the museum closes. We began to strip off layers of cement and paint from relatively poor renovations they had done over time to reveal the beautiful stone masonry that lay beneath. We restored it using lime mortar that was made at site. Before and after images of how these changes began to shape and create delightful transformations. An office block became a gathering space as the buildings started to speak of the history through their materials. We conceptualized a new pavilion as an island bar that anchors the 2 courtyards on either side, and crafted this out of a lightweight metal frame and hand-fluted local marble, which was honed down to a very thin thickness, which made it translucent and created a dialogue between the old and the new. We used other crafts such as traditional hand-cut mirrorwork that's normally used in old furniture like you see on the left, and we interpreted it in newer graphic forms that find place through different zones of the space. Different weave patterns based on textiles of the region find place in furniture, which all comes together as a tapestry of texture and light and gives the city a new watering hole that looks to the future while celebrating its past. We addressed a very different concern in the same city when Sunita Shekhawat, a jeweler, asked us to build her Haveli. Haveli is an old building for her eponymous brand of enamel jewelry that she does. There was already a new structure on site which she had recently built, which she did not like, and asked us to build it, bring it down and build a new building. The concrete structure was in good shape, and even though we would have had more fees and more freedom, to build a new building, we chose to look at how could we repurpose this in the existing structure. So instead, we reshaped the slabs, scooped out connections, and reworked the facade to create this. And in the process, we avoided emissions of about 500,000 kilos of CO2. This is the handcrafted stone facade that echoes the Indo-Saracenic roots of the city's architecture, and is a synthesis of Deco, Mughal, and Rajput styles, all of which have influenced the region. This narrative continues to the interior, where the multiple retail zones are defined by frescoes done on the ceilings, painted by ancient Jaipur miniature artists, the families, who usually work on small A4 sheets of paper. But we were able to work with them over several months of prototyping on scales and forms that were totally unfamiliar to create these spectacular hand-painted narratives from the gardens of Rajasthan that populate the multiple zones as you meander through the store. The project thus becomes a contemporary handmade symbol for both the brand and the city. We took this idea of circularity, of reuse, to a new building, where we began to explore the idea of doing a building that could be reshaped with emerging needs. This is a competition we won for a small visitor center at the base of the 15th century Mehrangarh fort in the city of Jodhpur. This is a project that we're finishing next month. It is for most part a naturally ventilated pavilion that's tilted off the rocky hill. So in section it gets sunk into the valley that's at south of the entry road, such that the new building is a datum to the entry plaza to the majestic fort. It is tilted off the ground so that it does not alter the natural terrain. It's a humble grid of slender metal and regional sandstone slabs, which allow for the building to be reconfigured with changing use. The construction does not use any mortar or glue or cement or silicon. The stone slabs are interlocked and pinned onto the superstructure. And aside from the waterproofing membrane on the top, the building can be dismantled and disassembled for reuse in the future. In fact, over the course of the project, over the last couple of years, it's undergone 3 variations as the needs of the trust have changed. The system uses less than 1/3 of the amount of stone as a usual stone masonry building of the region. The modular steel structure is designed such that it can take in stone panels that are 3 meters tall, 50 mil thick, either as insulated double-skinned walls or as brise-soleil screens that create a porous, naturally ventilated pavilion. There are interlocking shelves and lintels that slide in as a system of components which can be disassembled, like we spoke about. The flooring consists of perforated stone slabs slotted onto a metal frame that allows rain to flow through into the hillside. This is the building under construction. This technique allowed us to retain the trees which slice through the structure, how the building sits perched lightly on the edge of the slope. Once again, the artisans bring life onto otherwise machine-cut, smooth stone slabs. So for us, this project is a prototype which combines engineering and craft as a synergetic whole and proposes a system that is rooted in the region, yet creates solutions that are circular, frugal, and look at the future. So our work on these kind of projects over time has brought us a learning that a classical determinist model where the architect or the designer is the author and tells everyone what to do allows lesser degrees of freedom for other stakeholders to bring their wisdom to the creative process. Instead, we are trying to create a participatory model which is slightly more emergent, that allows multiple stakeholders to shape the final project, often producing a much richer outcome. This process needs our drawings and approach to be flexible enough to allow for improvement at different stages of the project, which is difficult but immensely rewarding. So then what becomes important is not the design control of one person as the author, but more a process that can empower and engage people deeply at each stage of the project. And that's something we've tried to bring into our organization of the studio over time. We realized early on that design driven primarily by the principle of partners has limitations of excluding others. and looked at processes of collaboration which included other team members and, of course, clients, and now have begun to start thinking of the studio as something that is alive beyond the walls of the studio or the ownership of the studio, as our values get shared and seeded in different stakeholders who become our partners in our value system. For instance, we work extensively with our studio past alumni as an extended network, our consultants, our contractors, artisans and vendors, all of whom become participants in the process. The more boundaries we remove, the greater the innovation we are able to harness and include. To create common ways of working becomes critical, and we've articulated a set of internal principles that guide us as a team, which we have evolved over the years. We believe it's the glue that binds all the participants in the process. Each of these have been defined in some details. You can see it on our website. But I will give you a sense of these with a couple of examples. So, for instance, trust as a starting point is critical for our process. We believe that each person will strive to do their best given the opportunity to do so. Thus, our focus is on creating the right conditions for this to happen within the studio and on the project. And you can only do that when you view the people that you're working with not as a means or tools to achieve your vision, but as contributors to the vision and to the process. This is something that has become a cornerstone for our studio, where we attempt to harness the genius of all people who form this extended network and team. To illustrate this in action more clearly, I want to share one last project. We were very fortunate to have the opportunity to design our first government project for the Department of Agriculture in the eastern Indian state of Odisha. There was a visionary kind of chief minister of the state, and he invited us to design the offices and include a farmers' learning center. We proposed to them that Indian cities don't have enough public space. Can we open up this facility to the citizens of Bhubaneswar after office hours, after the offices close? We did so very simply by lifting all the offices up and freeing up the ground plane to create a free-flowing space at stilt level that creates this connection to the city. So here you can see the top 3 floors are offices, and the ground plane opens up to the street with shared amenities such as a library, auditorium, training rooms, cafeteria, and the gardens, which get used for events and workshops and by students and for people to wander through after the offices close. Before I move on, I want to dwell a little bit on the idea of adaptive thermal comfort. I like to call it the idea of being comfortable with discomfort, which comes strongly into play in our proposal. In fact, not just for this project, but going forward, it's something we really question now. So we've been trying to move away from this common benchmark, which in India and other parts of the world, most current debates are around raising set points of aircon from 22 degrees to 26 degrees. For those of you familiar, it results in huge energy savings. The real question is, however, is there any such thing as a universal standard of comfort, of thermal comfort? When you look at people in this image, you can clearly see that the current context determines what's comfortable for them indoors in relation to outdoor temperatures. When decisions on comfort are made locally and regionally and seasonally, there are huge environmental benefits possible way beyond any green building norms. When we dress appropriately and in tune with the outdoors, our body can be comfortable with lesser variations in temperature. For the city of Bhubaneswar, we found this temperature to be pretty high, 29 degrees in the shade, as long as the slow-moving wind speed of 1 meter per second through a fan that's hitting our skin. So that movement of air is really important. We installed a night purging system for the building. So the difference between day and night temperatures is about 12 degrees. So at night, after 5 o'clock, there is cool night air that gets flushed into the building. The building has thick walls and partitions with a high thermal mass, which stores this cools. In the day, once the temperatures begin to rise, the vents close, slow-moving fans come on, and when people walk in, and the thermal mass of the building acts like a cooling device, which exchanges the heat and the cool. We've done post-occupancy analysis of the building 3 years later. And even in peak conditions, we are able to meet IMAX standards of thermal comfort. The building consumes 1/3 the consumption of, as per the SDG 2030 goals of green building performance targets, and it's 10% of current green rating standards for office buildings. Here you can see the building with its courtyard morphology, which allows for all the corridors which are shaded, naturally ventilated, and all the rooms to kind of follow that same principle. However, what we must also recognize that we had a role of creating something that was iconic, which represented identity for the building, for the forward-looking state, forward-looking Orissa, yet being rooted in the culture. So we derived our inspiration from the textile crafts of the region, and we used 4 colors of brick representing the different soils of the state as vertical shading louvers, which shade the glazing, and created a graphic expression that celebrates the region and moves away from the usual aspiration for steel and glass being a symbol of the future. There are other ways of symbolizing it. We convinced the government to give patronage to a body of regional skills and crafts at an architectural scale. It was interesting for us to find out that in the region, a lot of farmers work as artisans in the non-farming seasons. We were fortunate to find and partner with a local architect who run this part of the project. We discussed the brief, created the canvas of the public space, and then left it to him and the craftsmen to own the project. For this to succeed, we had to let go of our control and trust the team. They created stories around mythology, around agriculture, all related to the theme of the land and something that would be familiar to the local farmers, such as these condylite stone lotuses that get embedded into the concrete slabs, or the way our engineering services shafts were screened in hand-carved stone lattices, or even the way the dead walls, there were very large dead walls for the auditorium that were carved at site for 6 months, which larger-than-life paddy crop. The Bastar metal work, which is forged on hand kind of blown metal, which was used as screens and as lighting devices, and even the building signage. So this is how the building sits in context of the city as you walk by. And I'd like to leave you with a film that captures the learnings and the experience of the craftsmen who worked on the project.
We were quite excited, with the quantum of work that could be generated if artisans, if craft and architecture could come together. And I think that has been a big achievement, that this building project could generate work for about 50 artisans for a continuous 6 months. And we actually got artisans who had stopped working in the traditional skills. We convinced them to come back and to start working again.
काम करुले से सेमती निर्दिष्ट गोटे कम भितर रही चिंताधारा से गोटे भितर रही निर्दिष्ट मूर्ति बनवारे चिंताधारा से भीतर सीमित थिला जार फल यही कमटा कृषि भवन कम कर आम मान को देखागला से प्रकृत में आम आम कलाटा को केमतिका अन्य दृष्टि भी देखिपर.
It's a perfect setting for us where we could bring in artisans and craft. If you talk of farmers and if you talk about people coming from villages to this building, then we want to show them something that's familiar to their environment, and that is where craft comes in.
Thank you.